Have you ever noticed some people just can't stop collecting things? I'm not talking about casual hobbies, but obsessive accumulation. Shelves lined with hundreds of the same type of object. Closets stacked with boxes. Entire rooms dedicated to collections that just keep growing. Vintage toys, books they'll never read, vinyl records, figurines, you name it. And if you ask them why they need so many, they'll give you reasons. They're valuable. I might need them someday. This one completes the set. But if you look closely at their face when they're explaining, you'll see something that doesn't quite match the logic. Something that looks less like joy and more like relief. Because the person who collects things obsessively isn't really collecting objects. They're collecting something far more intangible. So what are they really trying to hold on to? And why does it never feel like enough? Let's start with what everyone sees. You collect things. Maybe it's books, sneakers you never wear, or action figures still in their boxes. It doesn't really matter what the objects are. What matters is that you can't stop acquiring them. Your shelves are full, you've run out of space, but you keep finding more things to add. You tell yourself this is the last one, that you'll stop once the collection is complete. But the truth is, the collection is never complete. There's always one more variant, one more addition, one more piece to make it feel whole, and people notice. Some are impressed. They call you an enthusiast. Others are concerned. They use words like clutter and ask when you're going to get rid of some of this stuff. But neither group understands what's really happening. You're not collecting just for the sake of collecting. You're collecting because not collecting feels like a loss. And this is where it gets interesting. Psychologically, obsessive collecting is rarely about the objects themselves. It's about what those objects represent. Research shows that collecting often emerges as a response to anxiety, uncertainty, or a sense of lack. The objects become what psychologists call transitional objects, physical items that provide emotional comfort and security. For a child, that might be a blanket they eventually outgrow. But for you, the entire world has become a collection of potential transitional objects. Every item you acquire is a small promise of security, of completion, of finally having enough. But enough never comes because the emptiness you're trying to fill isn't on your shelves. It's in your chest. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you bought something for your collection and the satisfaction lasted more than a day? Or even an hour? That rush you feel when you find the perfect edition, how long does it stay before the restlessness returns? Here's what's really happening. You're engaging in what neuroscientists call reward-seeking behavior. Your brain releases dopamine, the pleasure chemical, in anticipation of getting something new. The hunt, the search, the moment of finding it, these all trigger a powerful response. But dopamine is about anticipation, not satisfaction. It's the wanting, not the having. So the moment you get the object, the dopamine drops, the excitement fades, and you're left with just an object. So you start searching for the next one because what you're actually addicted to isn't the collection. It's the feeling of pursuit. The truth is, you're exhausted. Let's talk about what this really is. Obsessive collecting often has roots in early experiences of scarcity. Not necessarily material scarcity, but emotional scarcity. The sense that there was never enough attention, enough stability, enough love. Maybe you learned that if you wanted something, you had to hold on to it tightly because it might be gone tomorrow. Or maybe you had everything you needed materially, but emotionally, you were starving. And somewhere along the way, you learned that objects are more reliable than people. Objects don't leave. Objects don't reject you. Collecting becomes a way to create permanence in a world that feels impermanent. Every object you acquire is a small act of control. But here's the paradox. The more you collect, the more you prove to yourself that nothing is ever enough. Here rests what people do and see when they comment on your overflowing shelves. They do and see you lying awake at night, scrolling through listings, feeling that familiar itch that only a new purchase can scratch. They don't see the guilt that comes after. They don't see you standing in a room full of things you once desperately needed and feeling nothing. They do and see the relationships that have suffered because you'd rather spend money on your collection than on experiences. They don't see that what looks like passion from the outside feels like compulsion from the inside. You don't collect because you want to. You collect because not collecting feels impossible. Attachment theory offers another way to understand this. If you experienced insecure or anxious attachment as a child, you might be terrified of abandonment. And in adulthood, that void gets filled with objects. Because objects are safe. They can't abandon you or criticize you. But you're trying to meet an emotional need with a material solution, and it can never work. No amount of books can substitute for being truly seen. No number of records can replace feeling deeply connected. No complete collection can heal the wound of not feeling like you were enough, just as you were. This is where it gets painful. The person who collects obsessively is caught in a cruel cycle. You collect to feel better, but the collection itself becomes a source of shame. You feel proud and ashamed at the same time. You defend your collection to others while privately wondering if they're right. And underneath it all is a question you're terrified to ask. What am I really collecting? If you're truly honest, it's not about the objects at all. You're collecting proof that you exist. Insurance against future loss. Control in a life that feels out of control. And perhaps most painfully, substitutes for connection and purpose. Over time, the collection that was supposed to bring you joy becomes a burden. You can't move, you can't travel easily, you can't invite people over. Your living space shrinks as your collection expands until you're living in the margins of your own possessions. And yet you can't stop. Because stopping would mean facing what you've been avoiding all along. The emptiness, the grief, the unmet needs. As long as you're collecting, you have a quest. But what happens if you stop? What happens if you sit still and ask yourself, now what? That's the question you've been running from. But this is important. None of this makes you weak or broken. You're trying to solve a real problem with the tools you have. The collecting isn't the problem. It's a symptom. It's a strategy you developed to cope with something much deeper. It worked for a while. It gave you something to focus on, something to control, but now it's a prison. The objects that were supposed to set you free have become the walls keeping you trapped. So what do? Healing doesn't mean getting rid of everything. It means learning to distinguish between collecting with intention and collecting from compulsion. The next time you feel that urge to buy something, pause. Just notice it. What are you feeling? What are you avoiding? What does this object promise you? Try waiting 24 hours before making a purchase. And here's the radical part. Start to grieve. Grieve the things you didn't get that you needed. The attention, the security, the sense of being enough. The void only starts to heal when you stop trying to fill it, when you turn toward it with compassion instead of fear. You are not your collection. Your worth isn't measured by what you own. You are the person underneath all of this, the one who's been searching so hard to feel safe and whole. And that person already matters. They always did. The objects can't give you that. No collection can make you feel whole if you don't first recognize that you were never broken to begin with. You were just taught that your value was conditional. But the truth is, you were always worthy. The collecting was just the best strategy you had for managing the pain of not knowing that. Maybe that's the real collection you need to build. Not objects on shelves, but moments of self-recognition. Days where you feel the emptiness and choose to befriend it instead of fill it. These moments build something more permanent than any collection. A sense of self that comes from within. So what would it feel like to walk past something you usually collect and not buy it because you genuinely don't need it? What would it feel like to discover that the thing you've been searching for was never in the objects at all? The psychology of obsessive collecting isn't about the objects. It's about a heart trying to build a home in the physical world because the internal world never felt safe enough. And you deserve to rest. Right now. You deserve to put down the search and recognize that you are already enough. You were always the most valuable thing you owned. You just forgot to collect yourself. Thanks for watching.